Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Legendarium podcast. I am your host, Craig Hanks, and with me, my guest today, Kristen Simmons. Kristen, how are you?
I'm so good. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, good. Me too. I'm excited to have you because it's an interesting topic that you and I are going to be talking about. I haven't decided what to title this episode yet. I'm sure that'll come to me later, but something like mental health and fiction, and the intersection between it. I don't know. I'll
Yeah,
figure it all out.
yeah,
But
yeah.
you are just to give people a little bit of background on you. You are historically a mental health professional, right? You've done that work before. Do you
I
still do it
have.
now?
So I'm not currently practicing right now, but I
Hmm.
I have a degree in psychology and then a master's in social work, and then I have what's called an L. Well, in certain states it's called an LCSW. Sometimes it's called an LISW, but it's a clinical social work licensure. So it kind of translates into a mental health therapist, and you can work with all different populations. And I spent
Hmm.
time after college working with every group from kids who had run away, who were living in group homes, to people who had been charged with sex offenses, to people who were survivors of domestic abuse. And then the majority of my time I spent actually working with returning soldiers from Iraq and Afghanistan, and also veterans from Vietnam era, in an intensive program for PTSD.
Intensive being the operative word there. That
Yeah,
sounds pretty
yeah,
intense, a lot of this stuff. Wow.
yeah.
Okay. So let's we're going to talk about how you got into writing, but before we
Mhm.
do, I want to remind everybody to go to thelegendarium.com. Just before we start our conversation, I'll do my housekeeping. Thelegendarium.com. That's where you can find past episodes grouped by author or by subject. You can find future episodes that are coming up on the calendar there, as well as links to Discord to join the conversation and Patreon to support the show if you enjoy what we do. Okay, that's out of the way. Now, you did all of that intensive stuff,
Yeah.
and you've also somehow managed to publish, let's see, carry the two, about 8,000 books. I'm
Yeah.
trying to count. What's
Just
your
shy of
count? Do you know what you're up
10,000.
to? Do you know how many novels have you published up to this point?
So this is actually 19.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well,
So,
thank you.
how did you I assume this is that writing is a lifelong pursuit and love for you. Nobody gets to 19 novels without it being I'll generously call it a love, right?
Yes.
Maybe obsession would be the better word
Yes.
sometimes. Yeah,
Yes.
tell me about your history with writing.
The mental health part of me definitely can agree with that. I think you're right on with that. Writing has always been an important part of my life and a passion of mine. I think I was writing stories when I was in elementary school, before I was actually, you know, able to figure out where a comma actually was supposed to go. I think I've always kind of been either telling stories or writing stories. Of course, telling stories and getting in trouble for them growing up, but then writing them as soon as I was able to, and and then I wrote my first novel when I was in college, and I think after high school I wanted to become a full time writer and just live the glamorous life of a full time writer, but I have a very Asian mom who is very practical, who was very clear that I should not confuse a hobby with a profession. So
Hmm.
I did go and get a degree, like I said, in psychology, and work in the mental health field for a long time while I was working to get published. And there were 5 books that I wrote, complete novels that I wrote, and tried to get published prior to getting an agent. And
Hmm.
I had almost 250 rejections from agents prior to landing my agent. So there was a long stretch of time that I was working in the field and writing, on lunch breaks and before work and after work, but not actually involved in publishing yet. So
Yeah.
it took a long time.
That's 250 rejections. That's a lot. And
Yeah,
it's probably a pretty common experience for somebody trying to get picked up who's
yeah,
doing what you're talking about. But still, it can sound pretty astounding to somebody on the outside going, it's how should I put it? It's simultaneously depressing and also energizing maybe to somebody who is trying to get published, where it's like, hey,
yeah.
look, 19 novels in, but it didn't start as, success right away. So it
No.
takes time, right?
No, it didn't, and I am happy. I am happy when people tell me that they did not have that long experience, but I feel like a great many people who are in this field have. They've spent
Yeah.
a lot of time trying to find an agent, a lot of time trying to connect to a publisher. So I don't think that's uncommon at all. And you're absolutely right. Like it was depressing for me to go through it, because of course you don't get 250 rejections in one day. They slowly trickle in over time. So
Just
you build a little defense up against it, and then here comes another one.
exactly. I was gonna say it's death by a thousand cuts. It's the
Yeah, yes,
your ego isn't getting beaten to death in one day, but it's getting slapped every day.
yes,
Every day
yes,
it's getting another slap.
yes.
So, all right. So then you decide to have a profession, as your mom asked you to do, right?
Yes, I she
And
did,
so you go into the mental health field.
yeah. Mhm.
And was it a situation where at first you were writing other things? It was you had other stuff on your mind, and then they merged, or was that always a passion of yours as well? And has that always been present for you in your writing?
Yeah, so, you know, I say that I was writing while I was doing, mental health work, and I did eventually switch over to writing full time, but it was never like a second choice for me. I will say I loved doing mental health work. Um, Although I'm not currently practicing, I still maintain my license every year and keep it up because I don't know if I will ever want to jump in and go back, or if that will, the world will ever need somebody locally to jump in. And I'd like to be
Mm,
able to do that if that happens. But yeah, I did love I did love mental health work, and I do love the idea of therapists being out there for people in need, and social workers being out there when people need help. And yeah, it was something that always kind of was a dual passion for me. I loved writing stories. I loved the escape of it, but I also um, felt firmly grounded in the real world to be able to say, these are problems that I see every day, and I'd like to help with them if I can.
yeah. So how does it inform your writing? And
Yeah.
let me back into that question a little bit and talking about an experience that I had watching. Oh gosh, there goes the Jets. That's what I get for living under the Air Force Base.
Oh, that's
Um,
okay. I was going to apologize earlier for the dogs. I have like
oh,
a little dog situation here, so I apologize if they bark.
fine by me. No, you're good. You're good. Um, okay, so an experience I had with another podcast, actually, it has nothing to do with the Legendarium. This is just in a different genre, but it was actually a podcast about mental health, and it was a fictionalized, like a serialized fiction via podcast, a radio drama almost.
Yeah.
And as I was listening to this, going through the production, I was a little bit bothered, honestly, because there would be this story that they're telling. It's a science fictional story that they're telling, and then it was almost like they had words and phrases and concepts that they wanted to get in there from their profession, and it was like the story would come to a halt, and they would just go on this long discourse about this thing. One of the characters would give a lecture about some concept or another,
Mm,
and then they'd finish up and the story would go on. And it was, to my mind, awkwardly integrated
hmm
into the story.
hmm
But So the reason I tell that is because just to say that when you have a concern like you do, mental health, when you have a topic that you want to integrate, it can be tricky to do that and maintain. How do I put it, to integrate it seamlessly into the story?
Mm,
Is that a concern of yours? Do mental health concepts? Do you try to weave them in seamlessly? How do you do it?
yeah.
How does this inform your writing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a great point you bring up. And I think honestly, I mean, I try to integrate them seamlessly, mental health themes into my writing, because I think honestly, mental health themes integrate into our life so seamlessly, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
fair
we don't
enough.
really stop to have a depressive episode. We don't really stop to have an anxious moment. This is just part of our lives, and granted, life can feel like it stops when we feel that way, but it doesn't. We continue to feel, we continue to think, we continue to have, you know, our bodies continue working through all of these experiences, and so do our minds. And I want that to be reflected in my writing, I guess. That this is normal. This is absolutely normal.
Yeah.
People are different, brains are different, they respond to situations differently, and that is not something that's outside of any character. That's not separate from any character. Just like it's not separate or outside of us. Like we constantly are dealing with stressors and how we manage them, and roll right along, and so do the characters in my books, hopefully.
Hmm.
They've recognized the things that are going on, and sometimes it becomes a very big struggle and a focus, and sometimes it is just something that they deal with and live with, um, just like all of us, I guess. um,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I like this because with this particular topic, it's I know a gentleman who is a fellow beta reader for Brandon Sanderson, and a lovely guy who's he's really great at beta reading. Um, and he was brought on for a very specific reason. It was because he was a fighter pilot, and
Oh yeah.
Brandon wanted to do this story that involved fighter pilots. And so, hey, I need somebody who knows this topic. But it's so outside of most people's normal everyday uh, life, right? Their experience. So you need somebody with that really specific experience. Whereas, as you say, gosh, of course, it's incandescently obvious when you say it, but mental health is something we all deal with constantly every
Yeah.
single day, whether we put it in clinical terms or not, right?
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
you do you work clinical concepts in kind of in an outward facing way, or do you take the concepts that you've internalized, that you've learned, and simply work them kind of under the surface in that day to day everybody goes through this kind of way? Does that make sense?
Yeah, both. I mean, I have books where characters are dealing with things and going to therapy, and talking about them in therapy. So it's a very clear, deliberate, um, exercise that they're going through. And then I have other characters where it's just simply described as symptoms that they have and things that they deal with, and they're managing. So I think it's kind of both, depending on the books that I have. But I would say the majority of my books is, they're just people, right? They're just dealing with the things that come up in life, and their brains work in different ways and they manage them in different ways. I will say, um, there's a quote that people say, that writers always write the same story again and again in different ways, and I
Right.
think that's definitely true for me. I think that the time that I spent doing trauma therapy specifically definitely affected me in a very deep way, and how can it not? Right, because you spend
Yeah.
time with these people who have experienced these horribly traumatic things, and you know survived them, but are dealing with these really, really awful consequences sometimes, and you get to be with them in those moments where it's crushing them, and also see them climb out uh, to a different
Yeah.
way of life, to a new way of life, to adapting to how life is while experiencing some of these things and kind of getting those symptoms to become more manageable over time. And that's an incredibly moving process. And it can't, like I said, it can't not affect you. And
Of
I was
course.
so affected by um, being with those people and being able to help them in some small way, but really just seeing their recovery and reintegration into the world. And I think that is a story that I tell again and again and again, not with veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, but with characters who have undergone some kind of trauma, who are learning to deal with it, learning what is going to be something they can manage and what is something they're going to have to let go of, and how they're going to come back to a place where they're comfortable in their lives and they're thriving again. So I always have characters facing insurmountable odds. I always have characters who are clinging to some small feather of hope and who are trying to get through something just awful, and dealing with the consequences and side effects of those experiences. So in a way that has really those experiences in mental health have really affected my writing. But I also wanted to say that I think the opposite is true. I feel like the writing really has affected my ways that I view mental health as well, because I think that writing fiction in general is such a lens for looking at things that happen in the world and things that happen in your life. And we spend, so much time trying to process what's going on around us, news events and experiences and traumas and relationships. And fiction really helps us do that, right? Fiction helps us process all of that. And so I think that it's worked both ways. The curtain opens both ways, that sometimes I've pulled events from working in mental health to inform my writing, but sometimes my writing is my way of processing things I've seen in mental health as well.
Yeah, there's a great story that came up on our Discord server a few years ago. I believe it was Combat Wombat. Shout out Combat Wombat,
Yeah.
who was he was working as a prison guard in Oregon, I want to say, and it was his last day on the job. I apologize, Wombat, if I'm getting the details wrong, but it was his last day on the job, and he was doing his rounds, and he noticed a prisoner that he'd talked to lots of times
Yeah.
before, and he was obviously having a tough time, and so he goes in and he's talking to him, and um, noticed I think it was a Patrick Rothfuss book on the shelf, or maybe
Yeah.
it was a Sanderson book, I don't remember, but knowing that, because they both knew that story, he was able to pull out the characters from that story that were relevant to this prisoner's state, his mental state at the time, the
Yeah.
issues he was going through, and say, look at how this character did it,
Yeah.
and they bonded over that, and it can be a really beautiful thing to have a story that is fictional. So you're not, how do I put this? When you're talking about true stories, other people, lives that were actually affected, it can have a different valence,
Yeah.
and make it more awkward maybe to try to relate to them because they're real.
Yeah.
Whereas when you have something that's fictional, you have that remove, and you're able to kind of put yourself in that character's shoes a little more easily, perhaps. I
Yeah.
don't know. Is that fair?
I absolutely think that's fair. I think that that's what we want to do every time we read a book, right? We want to experience some level of transference and to be able to say, like, I am the hero of this story, or I I can withstand these things that this hero is dealing with. I can fight my way through this too. And if the hero is brave enough to fight through those battles, then I can fight through my battles here too. There's an enormous amount of connection, I think, between fiction and our own ability to face reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a different question then, and change tack just a little bit. Do you have a favorite character that you've written in all these 19 books? Something that really hit home for you and did what you're talking about, that two-way veil, with information and emotions crossing both ways? Is there anybody that stands out to you in any
Oh
of your
my
books?
gosh. There's so many.
Of
Because
of
I
course,
think they
I'm
all
not
have
I'm
this.
not asking for your favorite child, but
Yeah. Of course you're not. But we all know we have one.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't know that there's like a specific favorite child that I think embodies that more than others, but I definitely feel like they all do in some way.
Well,
I
let me ask it this way then.
Yes.
If somebody is coming to your works brand new, they've never
Yeah.
read anything that you've done, which book, and and which character in that book maybe, but which book or series would you say, you know what, pick this up because I'm really proud of how X turned out?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so here's what I'll say. I've written a book called The Glass Arrow, which is about a world where women are endangered, and there's a girl that gets caught in hiding in the mountains, and she gets brought in for uh, to be in this facility to be groomed for domestic servitude, basically, and her whole goal is to break out of this rigid terrible system and return to a place of freedom. And I once had a woman who drove several states over to find me at a signing to tell me that she had left an abusive situation because of that book.
Oh, wow.
And that was a moment that I will never forget, as an author and as a human and as a person who is involved in mental health and as all of the things. That was a moment that I will definitely never forget, because she felt that if this character could do that, then she could do that too. And that was something that I had never even hoped would happen. But I was very, very proud to be a part of that moment with her.
Yeah, no doubt. The Glass Arrow.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, good. Yeah, I wanted to get you on the record as like, yeah, try this book. So that
Yeah.
sounds really that sounds affecting for sure. I wouldn't be able to forget that either.
That's a book that actually it took it really affected me to write, because there's a lot of I would say there's a lot of like personal stuff that goes into, I mean, they are in all my books, of course, but like
Of course.
there's a lot of personal stuff that went into that book, and a lot of like what it feels like to be a woman in a society that does not always value women, and what that experience was like as a child stepping into the role of a woman and what that feels like.
Mm.
And yeah, and that feeling of how to break free of from different kinds of oppression, you know.
And it strikes me as you were describing that situation, you were describing the plot of the book and then the woman who came to you, it struck me that if somebody heard that description of the book, they might go, "Oh, well, I that's not the way I see the world.
Mhm.
I don't see society as that," and that's fair. I mean, we all
Yeah.
see the world through different eyes and in different ways, but something like that can be personalized, where you're describing this society, that this grand structure. It sounds very kind of Handmaid's Tale almost,
Yeah.
and it's this societal structure that you're describing, but for an individual reading it, their personal situation may feel very much like that, whatever the societal conditions around
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So you never know when somebody's personal situation matches or mismatches with what
Yeah.
yours is, and
Yeah.
I find the personalization of fiction very compelling.
Absolutely.
Obviously, I mean, people who have been listening to this show have been hearing me talk about the three levels for a long time. I won't bore you with that. They know it. So anyway, yeah, I love the personalization of fiction. Okay, so let's oh gosh, I had another question. This is where I run into problems, Kristen, because I don't write down my questions beforehand. I like to have a conversational tone, and then something will occur to me, and then 6 minutes later, I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sure it was great. I'm sure
It
that was a
was
great
such a
question."
good question. You know what? I bet it was so good.
That you have no idea. Okay, so,
I bet I had a great answer to it too. So
well, yeah, that's no doubt. Let's talk about the newest offering though. Your latest book that's it's called Find Him Where You Left Him Dead.
Yes.
Holy smokes, what a title. First of all, I have to ask you because I know that authors oftentimes have shall we say friction. Ooh, very nice. Yeah, if you're on YouTube, you get to see it, right? Uh, Authors sometimes have friction with their publishers around titling,
Mm.
and that's fine. You know, the publisher knows how to market a book, presumably, hopefully, and maybe the author has a preferred title or something. But when I read that title, I went, "Holy smokes, that's fantastic!"
Oh,
Was
good.
it yours? Was that input from the publisher? How did you get that title?
I would love to say it's mine, but it really was a group project. It
Yep.
was I had several names beforehand, and we workshopped them a lot, and they just weren't quite hitting. Um, and then it was I think honestly it was like we called it Find Him, and then it was Find Him Where You Left Him, and then someone was like Find Him Where You Left Him Dead. It
Oh
was just
man.
added on and on and on until we got to this point where we're like, yeah, that's what we want to capture. That feeling right there when you say that whole line, that's where we are.
It's pretty fantastic.
Oh,
So
good.
whoever
I'm
that
glad you think
was,
so.
hat tip. Yeah, that's great. So tell us a little bit about it, and I want to also weave in what we've been talking about,
Mhm.
how your mental health experience has informed this book. But give us the bones of the story. What's it
Yeah.
about?
Yeah. Okay. So here's my pitch. 5 kids go into a cave, but only 4 come out. And years later, the missing kid is back, and he is haunting the remaining friends and saying that if you go back to the cave and you finish the game we started, you might have a chance to find me alive. So
It's yeah, nice. So a bit Jumanji-esque, right?
it's a bit Jumanji-esque, and it is very, very steeped in Japanese mythology. So
Mm,
yes, I'm Japanese, and comes from a lot of stories that I heard growing up and stories that I've researched, and um, just a big love of yokai and oni, which are Japanese demons, and all sorts of like I said, mythology, like Izanami, the goddess of death, makes an appearance, and all
mm,
sorts of things. The game that they play, the Jumanji-esque game that they play, that they started years ago and now have to continue, is set in a Japanese kind of purgatory of sorts. So it's based on Japanese Buddhist beliefs. This place called Miedo, which is like a Japanese purgatory slash hell slash afterlife.
okay. So before we get to the mental health side of things, I actually wanted to ask about this because
Yeah.
as a shall we say, ignorant person, well, I read this is the start of a yokai horror duology.
Yeah.
What's yokai horror? Can you fill me in on that?
Oh well.
What does that mean?
I love some yokai. I can tell you that much. So this all started actually with my son. My son, we live in Cincinnati, and there's not a huge Asian population in Cincinnati. So
What?
yeah. So I learned very early on that I was going to have to educate him on a lot of these things that he may not be seeing every day in his life. So we have a standing date on Tuesdays. We have since he was very little, where we get together after school and we talk about different cultural things. Everything from food to words to media, stories, folk tales, to yokai. So we started getting into yokai a couple years ago, and he just ate it up. I mean, we got an encyclopedia of yokai. We were reading it. The cool thing about yokai, if you don't know, this is like a Japanese ghost slash spirit slash demon, and yokai are very well documented. So while Western traditions has this idea of like a ghost will haunt you, yokai are always very specific. So there's a yokai, that eats this food, that haunts this public restroom, that comes from, this prefecture of Japan. Like, it's all very documented. And if you look in encyclopedias, either paper or online, you will find just basically thousands of yokai that people have discovered and learned about and documented. And they're so interesting. Some of them are benevolent. Some of them are very not benevolent. They're very scary. I can tell you that I did all the scary ones in this book. But we read a lot about them, and he became obsessed. I was already into it, but then became obsessed. And I realized, like, this is what I want to write about. This is the next story, is people who have to face these terrible yokai. And yeah, so this is a horror dark fantasy about, 5 kids who were playing a game that got stuck facing these terrible yokai creatures.
It sounds properly horrific or terrifying or whatever the word is that we want to use.
Disturbing, yes.
Yeah, there you go. Disturbing. Yeah. You color me intrigued.
Good.
I have seen. I can't claim to be a scholar of Japanese horror movies, but I've seen a few, and they know their horror. So
it's really disturbing, isn't it? And this is something that I have thought a lot about in writing this book, and even before that. There's this idea in Western culture that if you there's this cause and effect relationship with demons and the afterlife and ghosts, right? So if you are bad in this life, then you will go to the bad place. If you are mean, then you'll come back as a ghost. Or if you're bad, then you're going to be haunted by this ghost. And there's this cause and effect thing. So act right, and this won't happen to you. But
right.
In a lot of Eastern horror, in a lot of Japanese horror, it doesn't really matter if you're bad or not. It doesn't matter if you do anything wrong or not. Sometimes you just have to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yeah. And that really is what I tried to embrace in this book. Is this was 5 kids that were doing pretty great in life, that were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, that chose to play a game very innocently that turned out very wrong.
Yeah. So yeah, we have this Western idea, the trope of if you, in all the horror movies, if you have sex, the monster's going to come get you, or the killer is going to come find you. If you the stoner, the what is it? You've got the stoner, the jock, the whatever. You run down the list of basically like modern deadly sins or something, and it's like if you commit them, they'll come get you.
Yeah.
But there's something more terrifying about the randomness, right?
Yes.
It's so yeah, that's really interesting. So tell me about the mental health themes then that you've woven into this. Are there specific themes, or is this more of a background idea in this book?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a book kind of directly about trauma, actually. So like I said, 5 kids go into a cave, great friends, just 5 regular kids pushing each other to go a little farther, pushing each other to stay out a little bit later, start playing a game, they're making up because they're having fun, and one doesn't come out of that cave. So you've got a very definite trauma that has happened to these 4 existing children that come back into the real world. Years pass, and the effects of this trauma have really, really changed their lives. So, I have Emerson, who is the smartest girl in school and social, and, loves to do Jeopardy like questions with her friends. Well, now complete introvert, has thrown herself into a world of gaming. Her friends are NPCs, just has dropped out of school, spends all of her time alone, right? So her life has completely changed as a reaction to trauma. I have Madeline, who was the fun one, the adventurous one. Well, now she's a competitive swimmer. Her whole life is, surrounding rules,
structured.
And structure. And swimming is so meticulous. So it's very much like everything comes down to the second, because she knows that if she breaks the rules, bad things are going to happen. Right? So she doesn't break the rules anymore. And you have Owen, who is the shy kid, who not only lost a best friend in Ian, but also the first love of his life. And now here he is. He's gone the exact opposite way too. He's acting, he's on stage, he's presenting this character of himself, because that way nobody will have to look beneath the surface and see that he's really in a lot of pain. So all of these people, and there's rotating points of view in the story as well. All of these people have been severely affected by trauma and now have to bring these very different, their very different evolved selves back together in order to figure out how to survive this game and survive these challenges that are, maybe likely going to kill them before dawn. So yeah, it's
no pressure.
About healing from trauma, about recognizing the symptoms that happen to you as a result of trauma, figuring out what baggage you can lay behind you, figuring out what you have to work through and let go of, and what is going to stick with you no matter what. So you got to learn to deal with it.
Yeah. And I apologize, this is less about the book and more just a general question. In your experience, would trauma like that, I mean, yokai might not be the actual trauma that we go through in life, but we can have some severe trauma. Does that tend to change people's personalities? Like you're talking about these 180s that all these characters are doing. Does it ever just amplify who you already are? What does, I don't know, this is a huge question, but is this, what's more common in your experience? The 180 flip, or a kind of doubling down on who you already are?
I would say my experience, and again, this is going to be different for everyone, so I don't want to say that this is always what happens, but I would say my experience most likely feels like a 180 flip, because most people, whether or not they were more social and outgoing in the beginning, feel less social and outgoing as a result of trauma exposure. So, I mean, withdrawing is a kind of a classic symptom of PTSD. So, a lot of people will experience in that and say, I was doing these things before. I was able to go out and have dinner with my family and, be in a loud restaurant, and that didn't bother me before. Now I have to be alone, and I don't like a lot of stimuli and that kind of thing. So I would
go on.
Yeah, I would say whether or not that is an accurate view of their self, probably most people feel like there's been a 180 switch in their personality.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. Then you get to perception versus reality.
Right.
Oh boy, what a can of worms. And self-perception, the trickiest of them all, right?
Yeah. Which is really what matters, right? Like, I mean, how you feel about yourself is really what matters when you're on the road to healing anyway.
Yeah. So if someone is listening to this description of the book, and they've gone through trauma, some significant personal trauma, do you feel like a book like yours is going to be, to use a word du jour 10 years ago, triggering in some way, or more cathartic? What do you hope for people who read this book?
I hope that there's hope. I mean, I hope that it is, it is a source of hope for those people. I think if it's going to be triggering, it's probably going to be triggering because it's pretty brutal. I mean, there's the kind of horror where there's sort of an uncanny feeling and something's not quite right and you don't know what that is. And then there's the kind of horror that there are monsters and they're right there on the page, bleeding and, ripping your eyes out. And those are the monsters that I write about. So I think if anything's going to be triggering, it's going to be the very vivid yokai descriptions. But also I hope that people reading it that have experienced trauma feel that inspiration that, look, these people are with you. These people have experienced this terrible thing and they are crawling out of it and they are clawing out of it tooth and nail, and you can too.
Yeah. Well, there you go. You know what? That's actually, I think, a pretty good place to leave that for the moment. So let's just hold up the book again so anybody watching on YouTube can check it. And I will be sure to link to that in the description. It's called Find Him Where You Left Him Dead. again, one of my favorite titles I've come across in a long time. That's
Oh, thank
absolutely
you.
fantastic. And I'll be getting my copy, but because I've been trying to get into more horror stuff, and
Yeah,
this sounds right up my alley. So,
awesome.
um,
Awesome. Thank
I
you.
I hope people go check it out. So, Kristen Simmons, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your experiences. This has been a really fun conversation.
Of course. Yes, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
Of course. And for the rest of you, I already mentioned the legendarium.com. But yes, go to the description for this episode, and I'll have links to Kristen's website, the books, all that stuff. So that's all there. Go check it out, and then hop on Discord and let me know when you've read either Find Him Where You Left Him Dead or The Glass Arrow or any of her other books. Let me know. I want to hear about it.
Yeah.
So thanks everybody for listening, and I guess that's it. I'll see you all next time.